Today, in current events from a Christian perspective, every single Democrat voted against a bill that would keep men out of women's sports, which is really not surprising, but also still sad. In related news, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, in a surprising statement, actually comes out against men and women's sports. So I don't know what world we're living in anymore. What I thought was going to happen did not, and what I didn't think was going to happen did. And yes, in another representative for. Another representative, and I will show you this clip, so stand by, and we'll see it in a little bit. He really just does not want men and women's shorts. And no, I didn't say sports that time. I did say shorts. I don't know where we are anymore, but all this and more today. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to Church Public. I'm your host, as always, and really appreciate you stopping by today. I mean, if you have subscribed, man, I really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio, really appreciate it. If you want to see the video, you can see the video at YouTube's, at the Rumbles. I am going to upload it to Substack, so you can now go to the Substacks, and you can see the video there. There's a little bit more writing there than some of the other places as well. If you do want to support, you can go to churchpublic.com/support or go to the Substack. There is an option to contribute there too. I do this as a labor of love to bring you current events from a Christian perspective so you can live out your faith because my, we need it. And yes, I know it's better now. It's better in this current presidential administration in the United States of America. But the reality is it is still wild and anti-Christian all over the place. And so we need to be ready to give an answer for the hope that we have, as Peter tells us. So we need to do that. We're going to look at current events from a Christian perspective to live out your faith. And I will bring Bible and Bible verses to any of this that I can that makes sense. And beyond that, we'll look at the world from a Christian worldview, from a theologically Christian perspective. We're not going to look at it from a Muslim perspective. We're not going to look at it from a Buddhist perspective. We're not going to look at it from a Mormon perspective. We're going to look at it from a Christian perspective because that is the religion of America, whether people like to admit it or not. That's how America was founded. Go and read the Mayflower Compact, if you don't believe me. Go and read that, and they specifically intended America to be Christian. Go and read the charters or the constitutions of the original 13 colonies/states. Go and read all those and then come back and tell me that this was not started as a Christian nation. It was, even though currently we're not really living in it. And that brings us to our first story. Unfortunately, the reality is that since the 1950s, Christianity has been declining in the United States. Depending on how old you are, you've likely seen or just noticed all of this happening. And since 2007, it's actually been worse and worse and worse. It's been crashing down rapidly in terms of those that self-identify as Christians. So if you ask somebody on the street, are you a Christian? Are you not? What do you identify as? The percentage has been going down and down and down of those who say, I'm a Christian. Maybe that's surprising to you. It might not be, because that's just the reality of the world that we live in if you've been paying attention at all. Well, so in kind of good news, according to Pew Research, Christianity is not declining anymore, as reported in the Washington Post. Quote, after years of decline, the share of Christians in the United States has stabilized, end quote. So that's kind of good. Just to unpack that, that means that since 2007, and really well before that, we've seen Christianity, church attendance, church membership, etc., declining in the United States. People saying they are Christian, people saying they do go to church, people saying they become members of churches. All of that has been going down and down and down. The big rise has been in the nuns. I'm looking over at my bookshelf. I have a couple of books about the nuns. I've probably talked about that before, but if that does not make sense to you, the word I'm saying is nun, N-O-N-E, not nun like a Catholic nun, nun, N-O-N-E. What that means is those they say are, they call themselves, rather than Christian, they say, I am spiritual, but I'm not religious. Or if you ask them, what is your religious affiliation? Their answer is none. So that is why this group has colloquially been called, quote unquote, the nuns. Again, lots of literature written about that in the past 15 plus years. All to say, like, the spiritual but not religious group has been growing. The Christian group has been shrinking. That's just the reality of what has been going on in America. Sad to see, but just the reality of it. However, this past year, according to Pew, 62% of Americans call themselves Christian. Now, we know that this contains a wide variation of what actually constitutes a Christian, and I'm not going to get into that today. This is like back when I was a kid. I don't know if you heard this. I don't know if people have said this to you, but just because you go to McDonald's, that doesn't make you a hamburger, just like going to church doesn't make you a Christian. I know it's silly, but it's also kind of true. You can go to church, you can do some things, and still not be a Christian. So in this study, people were asked a question, and they said, yes, I do identify myself as a Christian. So that's kind of problematic. Like, what do they really mean by that? Are they really a Christian? I have no idea. But the number has been steadily going down. Same question. 2014, the number was 71. 2007, it was 78%. And now it's 62%. So, of course, we're going down, down, down. Again, this is sad. And it's been declining for years, as we mentioned, especially from the 1950s on. But the small encouragement here is not that it is continuing to decline, but the encouragement is that, I guess, the decline has at least paused for this previous year. I mean, it's not super significant, but it is something. It's somewhat good news. We need to pause and look culturally at the changes over the past decade or two. There is a great divide in America. We all know that. We've all felt that over the past few presidential elections and all of the things in between. We know that Democrats and Republicans more and more are fighting against each other. It is a war of ideas, a war of ideology, a war of religion in many senses. I've talked about this over and over again. If you've listened at all, or if you want to go back in the church public archives, you know that one thing that I've talked about is the left does operate as a religion. It does. Some of the LGBTQAIP hashtag plus squiggle emoji $ things say that you have to believe what they say. And if you don't, you're kicked out, you're banished, and there is no forgiveness. There's forgiveness, there's penance, there's rites, there's religious rituals. Like, it is all that kind of thing. And of course, Christianity itself operates as a religion, though it is also, and maybe more importantly, a relationship with Jesus. So, all to say, Democrats, Republicans, Christians, non-Christians, they tend to be now lining up in that way. The Washington Post says it this way, quote, generally, the more religious someone is, the more likely they are to identify or lean towards the Republican Party and express conservative opinions. Less religious people are more likely to identify or lean towards the Democratic Party and express liberal opinions. So let's pause here. That's not me saying that, though I would agree, and I think that is in fact true. That is the Washington Post saying those that are more religious lean towards the Republican Party, and those that are less religious lean towards the Democratic Party. Again, just take note of this. You can say, oh, Matt, you're out to lunch. I believe that, but I'm not the one saying that in this sense. The Washington Post, which is not a very conservative news outlet, is saying this is true. And I would agree. I think that's a thing. I think this is what we need to understand. And this is from the latest religious landscape study of Pew Research. It's from a bunch of other just observable things. I think you've seen this. I think you know that. I've brought you things, even, if you missed it, go back into the last podcast that I did where I posted many of the people who were sworn in, including J.D. Vance himself, talking about Jesus. That did not happen. Just period. Full stop. That did not happen at all in the previous Biden administration. In fact, it was way weirder and worser. That's a word. Than any of that. And they talked about all kinds of just weird things. Whereas, whatever you think of this administration, whatever you think of the men involved in it and the women involved in it, the reality is people are praying to Jesus Christ. People are saying the name of Christ out loud. This is actually a really important thing that we have to continue to understand and point to from a Christian worldview and see this. So, Washington Post goes on to say, quote, highly religious Americans, for example, are more likely than the least religious Americans to say, listen to this. This is Washington Post. Here we go. Quote, abortion should be illegal. Homosexuality should be discouraged. Children are better off if mothers stay at home. Environmental regulations cost jobs and hurt the economy. And if America is too open to outsiders, it risks losing national identity, end quote. Again, I would agree with all of those things, but that is the Washington Post saying these things. That if you are more religious, You agree that you shouldn't be killing babies, that marriage should be between a man and a woman because a man is a man and a woman is a woman. Children should be at home with their mothers, and that's the best place for them. Sure, all of these things are just obviously true from a psychological perspective. I would go one step further, since we're talking about religion, and say from a spiritual perspective, of course, as well. Now, I hope, if you're listening to this all makes sense to you if you're a believer. Of course, if your beliefs lead you into cultural and political other ideas, then you won't believe this. You'll think I'm a crazy person. But if you're a believer, this all just makes sense. The things that you believe lead you to cultural and political actions. The things that you believe say life is intimately worth value. Humans are valuable no matter what age they are, even if they're in the womb. So, of course, abortion would be morally wrong because killing a baby, no matter where they happen to reside, in the womb or out of the womb, is just wrong. So, yeah, of course, this is clear to you. It's not clear to those that are on the Democratic side because they want to argue for some other kind of freedom, some other kind of world, some other kind of ideal. They call it utopia. They call it paradise. They call it how do they say about history? History is a long progression towards justice. So if you just keep going forward, eventually things will just become great. Of course, you can't say great anymore because that's the other side, but you know what I mean. So, once you believe in God, once you have religion and you have a faith, then you operate towards a certain end. You make choices because this is the way you believe. And then, of course, as you have families, and families that are together also tend towards conservatism because once you understand faith and you have a family, you're more inclined to keep that faith and keep that family through legislation and action. All this is totally obvious, but we're in the Wild West at this point, so I have to say these things out loud. We want things to be consistent, even if, and here's the big thing that we always get accused of. We want things to be consistent, and this is everybody, even those that disagree with me. We want things to be consistent, even if we fail at consistency. Everyone wants this. Everyone wants to have rules and live by those rules. The problem is none of us live up to those rules. Actually, turning to the gospel at this point, that's the whole point of the gospel. The whole point I was just did some Bible study in Romans 8 today. The whole point of the Bible, the New Testament of Jesus, is you can't live up to the consistent rules that even God has placed on you, much less the rules that you've placed on you. And which is why we need a Savior, which is why we need Jesus, which is why it's great that, for instance, Ephesians 2:8, that grace you have been saved through faith, not by works, not by anything you did, so that you can't boast about it. It's nothing you did. It's what God did for you. And of course, we all know this. Well, not all of us. Those that study the Bible, those that follow Christ, know this and know that we want to be consistent. Going back to Romans 7, Romans 8, Paul is like, I am the worst of sinners. I keep on sinning. I hate that I keep on sinning. So should I just give it all up and just sin as much as I want? And of course he says, no, of course not. That's not the thing to do. He says, because in Romans 8, you have the Spirit if you have Jesus. So live by the Spirit rather than not having the Spirit and living by the flesh. Like, again, this all makes sense, even if you are inconsistent. And then, of course, the other side is like, well, then you're just a hypocrite. No, just to be clear, that is not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is when you tell someone to be a certain way and then you ignore all of that and do whatever you want. That's not what Christians do. Christians look at ourselves, they look at the world and say the world is supposed to be a certain way. The way we know how it's supposed to be is we read the Bible and do what it says. Very clear. Now, do we live up to that standard? No. That's exactly what I've been talking about. That's what Paul talks about. That's what Jesus talks about. That's what Peter talks about, what James talks about. What everybody in the Bible talks about is there is a standard. You cannot possibly live up to it. So you have Jesus. That's not hypocrisy. That's just not keeping the standard that no one on earth can keep, except for Jesus, who was perfect. The hypocrisy would be, you should live up to this, but I'm going to do whatever I want. Which, if you think back to many of the events that have happened over the last several years, that's kind of exactly what the left is saying. You need to do this, but I don't have to do it. Think about masks. Think about eating out. Think about Governor Gavin Newsom, who we'll talk about later, who said, you all have to stay at home and you can't go outside, but I'm going to have a great dinner at the French Laundry with all of my friends and not wear masks and not social distance and not do any of those silly rules that I made for everybody else. That's hypocrisy, telling other people to do a thing you're not willing to do. See the difference? I hope you do. I'm making a big point of this, but I think it makes sense. And I think we need to open our eyes to see these things so that when we come across them, we go, oh, I see what's going on here. And I see the biblical view and I see the rest of the world's view. That's what I will just continue to try to point out to you, again, as long as I have breath. So, if you believe there's a God who created the earth, who made us male and female in his image, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, then in terms of the whole array of issues, LGBT issues, gender identity, sexuality, marriage, gender, male and female, you've got this. This is all you can stand on. Like, you have to stand on these things. And that's because we have these foundational theological beliefs, convictions, and this is where we have to land. When you look at the whole political worldview, the landscape of what is dividing these current issues across the board, there's no question that this divide is conservative, those that want to conserve, which tends to line up with Christianity because they believe in reality, and liberal, which is just saying that, well, baby's not a baby, it's just a clump of cells. A man is not a man can be a woman physically, biologically, because and here's the divide. Like, the divide is reality, and I'm going to make up whatever I want. As you look closer, that's what is happening, and you can see these are Christians on this side because Christianity reveals the actual physical world, creation, or not Christianity and not religious, which just is secular and makes all kinds of things up. Again, this is not anything new, and I've been talking about this kind of thing for a long time, but I thought it was interesting that the Washington Post brought this out. I think it's interesting that Christianity is starting to stabilize, and I think it's on purpose, or not on purpose. I think it is stabilizing because the younger generation is looking out at the world and going, this is clearly not working. Whatever you're telling me, whatever wild shenanigans you guys are telling me is real, is clearly not, and it's not working. So what is real? And they have eyes, and there's only so long you can stare at something and say, I know you're looking at a duck, but I'm going to call that an elephant, until somebody says, I think that is actually a duck because it is swimming on the water and not swimming in the water. Like, those are different things. And everybody has eyeballs and they can see it. So you can look at a man who's dressed up like a woman and say, well, that's clearly a man because I have eyeballs in my head and I can see it. And you can say that's a woman all day long, but reality is reality, and you can't really lie your way out of that. This is the new world that we're in, and this is what leads us to our next story. So there's a bunch of stories here about men and women's sports, and I've talked about this many times over the last few years. So I won't spend too much time on this, but we will spend a little bit of time on this. And here's why. So first of all, there's a bill going through to try to keep men out of women's sports, which should be non-controversial because men and women are different. But of course, we can't say that anymore just at all. And I've played countless clips of wild leftists just not being able to answer the question, what is a woman? You may have seen the movie. It's a fantastic movie. It's terrifying, but also fantastic, by Matt Walsh in the Daily Wire. What is a woman? You have Ketanji Brown Jackson, who the Supreme Court nominee, now justice, who was asked what is a woman as a nomination for a Supreme Court and couldn't answer the question. So we've been around and around in this. But the funniest part of this whole thing is that Representative Steve Cohen, a Democrat representing Tennessee's 9th Congressional District, was asked about men and women's sports and had this as an answer.
Congressman, how are you? Congressman, why should men be in women's sports?
I just realized that I'm having some technical issues, so I'm not sure what's happening here, but give me just a moment and we'll see if I can't make it work. I may or may not be able to, but we're going to try. And so I'm doing this in real time. This is how it goes with a studio of one, people. So it's like you've got me and you've got me. There's no, cadre of secret people in the background, doing all kinds of things. That's just not how it goes. So it's just me and me. And again, this is why I love your support. I'm not trying to be needy here, but it's just me and my fingers pressing buttons. All right, we're gonna try that one again and see if the audio works this time. Here goes nothing.
Congressman, how are you?
Okay, thank you.
Congressman, why should men be in women's sports?
Shorts?
Sports. Why do you think?
They should not be in shorts.
I just I try, people. This is 100% real clip. I did not alter this in any way. So again, this is Representative Cohen. If you're just listening, you kind of miss out. I mean, listening is fine, and I'll love you if you're listening. I appreciate that. If you're just listening, though, you're missing one of the pieces that this particular representative is in one of those mobility scooters, kind of trying to scoot away from this reporter who's chasing after him, which adds a whole nother level to this. But anyway, so he's asked about men and women's sports, and the answer is men should not be in women's shorts. This is not, it's reality. This is not a parody. It's not a joke. I mean, it is, but for a different reason. And I have a side note here. Why are there so many geriatric representatives and senators? I feel like we are just not a serious country, but I guess that's a digression. This segment is about men and women's sports, not men and women's shorts. Though, really, when I'm thinking about it, I could get behind legislation for each. There should not be men and women's sports or women's shorts. So I don't know what to say anymore. Let's keep going. Now, to the Senate. The Senate voted against advancing a bill that, if passed, would have prohibited school athletic programs from allowing men who identify as women, otherwise known as men, to compete in women's sports. Because, of course, that's not fair. Because, of course, everyone with a brain knows that men are not women, and therefore men who are bigger, stronger, faster, all of those things should not compete against women, because that is just patently unfair. It is literally cheating, and I don't need to bring any more examples. If you haven't seen examples to this point, I don't know where you've been, and it's just so obvious and so clear that men should not be playing any sport against women. It's just ridiculous, because then why have women's sports at all? And it should just be sports, period, and just whoever is the biggest and strongest or fastest or whatever should just play, which would mean that no women would play at all, which is the whole reason there's women's sports in the first place. Who doesn't know this? I don't know at this point. But Senate Bill 9, also known as the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, received a vote of 51 to 45 on whether to proceed with the bill. It needed 60 votes to pass, and every single Democrat voted against this bill. I'm going to say that again. Every single Democrat voted against this bill that would have kept men out of women's sports. So I'm going to pause here and say, if you are a Democrat at this point, first of all, I thank you for listening to me. I'm surprised, honestly, because I get spammed. I've got some social media accounts, and I have some Democrat. I'll still call them friends. They are my friends, but I've got some people who are mad at me currently that have been friends for years and years that are less friendly to me now, and they spam me constantly with all of this Democrat propaganda. I had one person who was consistently sending about every day 2 to 3 videos from comedians and other people trying to convince me that I was wrong. And I'm like, you're sending me comedians. I can't take seriously. How am I supposed to take seriously videos from comedians? Comedians are comedians. Anyway, whatever. So all to say, if you're a Democrat at this point, I don't know why. I don't know how. I don't know how you can just close your eyes or plug your ears and yell la 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 like that men are women. This is what you're saying to me. Men are women, therefore they can play with women in women's sports, and there's no difference. So it's fine. Just do it. I can't do it. I can't figure it out. It's just wacky. So in good news, connected to this, last month, the NCAA, National Collegiate Athletics Association, announced a new policy prohibiting, their words, trans-identified male athletes, in other words, men dressed as women, from competing in women's sports. And that reversed an earlier standard where the NCAA said men can compete in women's sports if they test certain hormones and blah, 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 whatever. All of that doesn't matter because biologically, a man cannot ever become a woman, period. I'm going to get so canceled for this on the socials as I'm hearing myself say this. Anyway, whatever. I don't care at this point. So the NCAA's new policy came after President Donald Trump issued an executive order vowing to end federal funds to schools that allow males to participate in the women's athletic teams, which is great. So then, the story just continues to go. Gavin Newsom, as I have mentioned a couple times here, the governor of California, who is not conservative in any way and has been very pro-trans and pro-LGBTQAAIP, hashtag $ squiggly emoji, sat down with conservative Charlie Kirk on not Charlie's podcast, but Gavin Newsom's new podcast. And so in this conversation, and I try not to clip other podcasters' conversations if I can, but this is just wild, so I have to play it. So thanks to Charlie Kirk for doing this. Newsom appeared, and Charlie, to his credit, asked Gavin about this men and women's sports issue, and here is what they said.
So like you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports,
right.
that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out and say no.
No, and I appreciate.
But like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's easy to call out, the unfairness of that.
Like, I'm kind of speechless. This went on. You can go and watch the whole thing. It's actually a pretty great interview. Kirk, I think, did an excellent job kind of going back and forth with Newsom. I just the only thing I can sum up with this is apparently now the governor of California, who has made and enforced and pursued some of the most radical trans and pro LGBTQAIP hashtag ++ squiggly emoji $ laws in the nation, is now apparently anti men and women's sports, which is just wild. There's a lot of talk, a lot of gossip, I guess you would say, on the interwebs about Newsom wanting to run for president in 28. That's likely going to happen, and that's likely why he is running towards the center, because everyone knows the things that I've just been saying. You can only lie about these things for so long, saying that men are women and women are men. Though that is a lie because it's not possible, so it's not real, right? Everyone with a brain, again, knows this, but the lie has been propagated so long, some people are like, oh no, that's just real. That's truth. That's just reality. But every 8th grade biology student knows that's not actually how any of this works for any species on Earth. But for some reason, we're just saying, well, with humans it is, but except that it's not. So Newsom, I believe, is moving towards the middle, trying to be more centrist so that in 28, he can have more of a fighting chance in the presidential election. Time will tell. We'll have to see what happens there. So I'll give you one more because I'm getting tired of this. But the one more for us here is that Representative Jeffries, so another representative, was asked about this men and women's sports. And here's what he said. I just have to play this one because this is just also wild. Let's listen.
I want to ask about California Governor Gavin Newsom's comments saying that Democrats were in the wrong for allowing transgender athletes to compete in female and girls sports. What is your response to that after Democrats had opposed the women and girls in sports?
I haven't seen his comments. What Democrats opposed was unleashing sexual predators on girls throughout the United States of America.
Yeah, so first of all, listen, I talk for a living, and that was a terrible response. Just from a cadence perspective, I'm just going to reenact. I haven't done talking for my whole life and don't know how to answer the question. I can't even do it. Like, what? Like, the process, you can see like the wheels turning and smoke coming out of the ears. Anyway, so then the response is, well, Gavin Newsom may have said something about men and women's sports, but we just want to keep predators out of women's and girls' spaces. I'm sorry. What? So I'm going to agree and say, yes, that's correct. A man in a women's/girls bathroom, locker room, changing room, pool, etc., is the wrong place for a man to be. Again, every normal person knows this. Every parent knows this. Every mom, dad, sister, brother, everyone knows this. So I agree. And that's the whole point of saying that there should be a bill, not that you should need it, but that there's a bill to keep men out of women's sports. Like that is the whole reason. But he's a Democrat arguing against it for the same reason. Seriously, people, I got nothing. All right, let's keep going on. We're gonna have a Disney moment. I keep wanting to never talk about Disney again, but we keep talking about Disney. So anyway, all right. So here's what we got. This is actually good news. It's surprising, but this is good news. There's a new show in Disney called Win or Lose. I'm not gonna play any of the cuts, any of the trailers, because every time I do, the interwebs, the socials, just like trash. Cut out the podcast. They cancel the whole podcast. Like it's bad news. So I'm just going to show you this picture and hope that's enough to just let me get by. But anyway, so Disney show, animated show, Pixar show, Win or Lose. And from the Daily Wire, we'll read this now. The new animated series, Win or Lose, is making headlines this time for featuring an openly Christian character. Yeah, you heard that right. Win or Lose is going to feature a Christian character. Wild, right? I don't know where we are anymore. So just catching up, Disney has avoided Christian references for a long, long time. And according to the Daily Wire, that changed with the debut show Win or Lose, which is described as, quote, featuring the intertwined stories of 8 different characters as they each prepare for their big championship softball game, the insecure kid, the helicopter parent, the lovesick umpire, end quote. This new animated series includes a character named Lori who is feeling self-doubt. So, listen to this. She turns to God in prayer for help, and there's a cutout of an angel inside her bedroom. She says, quote, "Dear Heavenly Father, please give me strength. I have faith, but sometimes the doubt creeps in," end quote. I mean, how great is that? It's so great. That's this Disney Win or Lose. Here's if you're listening, I'm showing a picture of the softball team. Apparently, I don't know. Let me get to a conclusion in a minute. Let's learn a little bit more here first. So the industry publication Walt Disney World, WDW News, noted this is the first time in 2 decades, more than 20 years, any Disney show has made such a reference. They said the last time was the 2007 film Bridge to Terabithia, where the children Jesse and Leslie attended church together and discussed religion on their way home. So 20 plus years, and Christianity is at least making a guest appearance in one of these shows. It also is significant in this Win or Lose show because there was formerly in this show a transgender storyline that was included that is now cut from the show, which of course created all kinds of wild waves on the left, but is great news and something to celebrate. The character apparently remained, but all of the gender identity questioning was just removed. So what do we say about this? This is great news for the culture. It's quite likely, and this is my opinion, but it's quite likely a political response to the presidential election. But I would say just go slowly. And this is coming from, if you don't know me, if you haven't listened to a lot of these episodes, I was a huge Disney fan. And I mean huge. And you can talk to my family. They think I was over the top. Like, that's how much. And I have gone 180 degrees, like so anti-Disney, like so frustrated with them right now. But I'm not going to celebrate just yet. This is just one little piece of the cultural world, and I think we have to keep our eye on it and see what happens. In a related note, in related news, a couple of weeks ago, the Disney/Star Wars president, Kathleen Kennedy, announced her departure from the brand after about 13 years. She was an accomplished Hollywood executive, I guess is an accomplished Hollywood executive, depending on your perspective. And she did Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Marvel, and fans of those have all been celebrating her departure. The question is why? And I would say for those that don't know or haven't noticed, and I've talked about this, so if you haven't been listening here, I don't know what to tell you. You can go back and listen to some of those. But she specifically has hired people and then included all kinds of woke silliness into Disney and Star Wars and Marvel. There's a strong case that most of it likely came from the bidding of Kennedy herself or the people that she hired. There was that famous lady that she hired that said, I try to sneak, how did she say it? If there's anything gay in there, I probably put it in, or something like, We're trying to make this the most gay ever. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. And also just destroying kind of original stories. So the fans of Star Wars, I was a big fan of Star Wars growing up. I think she may be responsible for some of the destruction of many of the beloved characters, and inclusion of maybe some less loved characters. So some areas has been subtle, some more overt, like killing Han Solo, making Luke Skywalker a grumpy old man, undoing the plot point that Anakin had, that Anakin was the chosen one, then went to the dark side, became Darth Vader, then came back and killed the evil emperor. Excuse me. If that's a spoiler alert, I don't want to tell you that's like a 40-year-old story. So I'm sorry. But in the new series, we learned that all of this was for nothing because here's another spoiler. So plug your ears if you haven't watched any Star Wars movies in the last 10 years. So all of that was for nothing now because the Emperor actually lived for all of this and wasn't killed by Anakin / Darth Vader, who was the father of Luke Skywalker. Man, so many spoilers are happening here. I hope you guys are okay. Because the Emperor actually lived so that Rey, this new unknown character who mastered the Force in 5 seconds, could be the girl boss who killed him. I mean, essentially that's the whole plot point, and it's just silly and frustrating and not a great character arc at all. And then, of course, you can't even start on the clones. The clones who, as a feature, as a character, were biologically and socially identical, aka clones, except for one, which became a trans clone, which they named Sister, which makes no sense in any universe because either you're biologically and socially identical or you're not, which means you're not a clone. Like, none of this makes any sense, but this is the kind of ridiculousness that came out of the Kathleen Kennedy era of Disney / Star Wars. And of course, there's The Acolyte. I spent a fair bit of time criticizing that. You can go back and watch that episode if you want to, where the lesbian space witches, and no, that's not an exaggeration, that's actually what they were, performed a demonic incarnation ritual because, well, societies with all women can't have babies because all women, again, you can go back and watch that if you want more detail, but all of that is ridiculous woke Disney shenanigans, and it's great to see that Disney may be changing. As I mentioned, I'm still skeptical, and I'll monitor the silliness, so I guess you don't have to. All right, friends, we're going to start winding up. I have one more thing to play for you. We want to look at something good, and I always show this verse as we get here, the Romans 8:28. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God is doing things no matter what. Don't get too down. Don't get too depressed. God is doing something good in the land. He just is. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this clip in its entirety. The Shepherd Conference just occurred. And this was for years and years and years one of the flagship events of John MacArthur's church. And unfortunately, this year, John MacArthur could not attend. I have been a fan for years and years and years. I don't agree with everything, but I agree with a lot of his theology, and he helped shape some of my theology. And I appreciate him as I guess you'd say, mentor from afar via his books and writings and sermons. And at any rate, he is just not doing great from a health perspective. So instead of attending, or in lieu of attending the Shepherd's Conference, which he was not able to do, he shared this video. And I want to play this video for you because I think it is wonderful and sad and encouraging all in the same time. So let's take a listen to this.
I want to say grace to you, all of you who are at the Shepherd's Conference. For me, it's the highlight of the year, so you have to know my disappointment in coming to you through video. It really came down to being the only option because I haven't had such a speedy recovery as I hoped to have. I feel great. I just lost a lot of strength by being 7 weeks in the hospital. I mean, it's the hospital that can kill you. You can survive the illness. If you can survive the hospital, then you've won on every level. It took a toll on me physically, so I'm seeing physical therapists and trainers and trying to get back as soon as possible. I had the message on my heart, and I didn't want to lose the opportunity to give it to you. So we've printed it up in a booklet. The good news is you don't have to listen to me, and you don't have to take notes, because you're going to get the sermon in a booklet form. I just know how much I miss being at Shepherd's Conference. I love the fellowship. I love the preaching. I especially love the singing, every aspect of it. And the camaraderie and fellowship of meeting people is always a highlight. So thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your faithfulness and being a part of Shepherd's Conference. I'll be praying for you and asking the Lord to bless in an unusual way and sharpen all of us for whatever the Lord has for us in the future. I realize I'm on the last lap. That takes on a new meaning when you know you're on the short end of the candle. But I am all thanks and praise to God for everything He's allowed me to be a part of and everything He's accomplished by His Word in these years of ministry. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ.
I mean, wow, that was just fantastic. Yeah, that is the way it needs to be done. MacArthur is 85. He's been battling health issues and heart issues for more than a year. That's just a great message. One of the things that I love that he said was that he's on the last lap. And that is somber and yet encouraging. And it's been wonderful to learn from him from afar and watch and grow, and to have the humility to know that you have been a part of something and accomplished something and are coming to the end of that race is, like I said, sobering and encouraging all at the same time. So I'll end there. I appreciate you tuning into me. I in no way compare myself or measure up to John MacArthur at all, but I appreciate you listening for today. I do want to continue to say God bless you, and I hope that through all of this, you'll continue to keep the faith. Once again, if this has been helpful to you, I just hope that you will like and subscribe and do all the things. You can go ahead and leave a review, hit all the buttons for the notifications. And if you want to support, churchpublic.com/support or substack.com and search for @churchpublic. God bless, and we'll see you next time.